I'll just do an introduction to myself and Selina. So as we mentioned, we're part of the Youth Collective. So we're a group of representatives from the young community, and we work quite closely with Arts Emergency's wider team. So we're all about advocating for young persons' interest in the arts emergency and making our voices heard, and taking a more leadership role. And this is the new season of the Arts Emergency Room podcast. So it's the first episode. And the podcast is essentially an online event series. So it's where members of the Youth Collective, we hold an open space to have honest conversations with people from the industry, and talk honestly and authentically about the realities of working in the creative industry, which we all know can be like quite difficult to navigate. So previous episodes have explored ideas like archiving, filmmaking, storytelling. And so this episode is all about craft and making, and the idea of who gets to make, and talking about creative survival. So not just creative success, but how do we have a sustainable career in making, whatever that creative practice is. And yeah, I'll let Selina introduce our guests.
So we are here with Blackhorse Workshop, which is a social enterprise dedicated to making and offering easy access to a fully equipped wood and metal workshop that's open for all. So Joe, do you want to just give us a wave just so everyone knows who you are? So Joe Clarke is the director of Blackhorse Workshop, and Joe is an artist and a maker with 20 years experience in the non-profit sector, leading creative community-based programming, mainly in East London. She has worked in social enterprise and cooperative development and is the founder of London Green Wood CIC. She's also a trustee with a focus on community participation at Rosetta Arts. Amazing. And we also have Lucy Martin. Lucy, do you want to give a wave? Yes, a creative programs manager, schools and young people. Lucy is an experienced creative youth practitioner with journalist who has worked with young people to produce documentaries, podcasts, photography, exhibitions alongside craft-based youth programs, having programmed and led multiple youth projects across East London, contributing to the long-term change for young people. This is a question for both of you guys, actually. So what was your journey into the arts? Like, what did it look like? Where did you start?
Me, in terms of journey into the arts, I come from a family where everyone sort of makes stuff themselves, but it was never sat in the context of the arts. It was very much just welding as a trade, woodworking as a trade, and then sort of pastimes at home of making stuff. So it always sort of sat within a more trades space of what I understood sort of welding and making to be. And then I always ran after school clubs when I was younger, which always had sort of an art-based focus. But again, it sort of didn't sit within the idea of me going into the arts. It was just sort of something I was doing. And then I had the opportunity to go to University of the Arts London for university. And that sort of introduced me to a lot more people who did see what we were doing as sort of an art career or sort of future thinking about what we were making in our house shares. So me and a group of friends created a collective when we lived together, and we put on sort of our own art exhibitions the whole way through university. And then I left university early. I didn't complete my degree, and I left to go manage a pub, which was a bit of a change. But within the context of there, we sort of made the pub into a bit of like a cultural hub and sort of a support hub. So we had like live drawing classes on in the evenings, on the weekends. We had different sort of like artists and creatives come in and run activities from the pub. And then sort of from there, I hit a bit of a wall in managing pubs, and sort of went back to what it was that I was doing before, which was sort of running after school clubs, holding sort of workshops, facilitating and programming, but not really seeing it through that sort of lens of stuff, and realised sort of the whole way through how frustrated I'd become with the barriers into sort of art world and creative industries. So when Anne got a youth work job and started being a youth worker full time, and the role within that was specifically based to get young people who had been either excluded or at risk of exclusion from secondary school into partnerships with like the BBC, the V&A, sort of the Guardian, more in that sort of journalism and cultural space. And then since then I've stayed within youth work, but within the context of sort of getting young people into the creative and like art industries.
I actually feel like we kind of have like a similar trajectory, or at least I'm kind of like in a stage as well where like you graduated, you're working, but it's not necessarily like art related, but at the same time, like I guess everything is full circle. Same question for you, Jo. What was your journey into the arts and what did it look like?
So I guess I come from a very middle class background. So I grew up with a lot of the opportunities that Arts Emergency exists to provide for young people now. And it's harder, it's much harder now as well, isn't it? Especially for students. But so I was always into, you know, making, drawing, painting. It was very supported at home. You know, it was expected that I would go to university and do whatever. So I was really encouraged to, you know, follow my interests and supported to do that. And I think that's why it's so important, especially as social justice issues get so much more increasing. The Arts Emergency like continues that battle. So it was a very roundabout way of just going to university and then following whatever I was most interested in at the time. And I would get involved in something, maybe as a volunteer, maybe as a little job on the side, and they always ended up leading to a job. And but it was a privilege to be able to do that as well, you know, and I acknowledge that. And living was a lot cheaper. So I was able to just kind of follow my nose of like, I'd like to do some bike maintenance, and then I'd like to do some creative workshops in schools, and I'd like to do some gardening, and there are things that didn't necessarily appear together, but actually there is a pathway around kind of community producing, working collaboratively, and doing stuff which is about learning new skills, but also sharing new skills with other people, and how you continue to provide opportunities for people to engage in making. And I think when this workshop started in 2014, that was on the cusp of a kind of real shift in people starting to be interested in making things by hand again. And that felt really novel at the time, that people were interested in making bread and gardening and textile work and making stuff by hand, and that has really, really grown. So it has shown that no matter what technology is doing and what we've got in, you know, the phones we've got in our hands and AI and all this stuff now, actually people, regardless of what they're doing for work, want to make stuff with their hands. And it's really fundamental about being a human. Whether you think it's through creativity or not, like, we need these physical outputs, and we need these outputs that connect our hands and our brains. And that is a fundamental part of being human. And if we can do those things together, most of us enjoy it more that way.
So on board with you as well. I'm an artist too, so I'm all about the tactility and like painting and making. And yeah, this whole kind of like world of like technology is just it's crazy.
Yes, I wanted to explore the access to begin with, and that fear and sense of belonging. And I sort of wanted to explore maybe craft spaces and that immediate feeling sometimes that feel quite intimidating, especially with jargon or tools, and exploring the process of learning, which I've used to really not like school in some ways because of the way learning was framed. And now that I have a lot more agency and autonomy in how I want to learn, I am an extreme hobbyist, and I have, just want to learn all the time. Exploring the idea of like, have we lost the art to play as adults? Because as kids, you know, even the class that's happening right now in the cafe, we encourage like experimentation, and we give space to make errors, make mistakes, and there's that feeling of play. But do we need like permission to experiment again and play? And I also wanted, Lucy, if you want to talk about your beautiful project that was exhibited in the cafe, because it kind of explored similar ideas.
I have this sort of back and forth about this idea. And I think for me, coming from the perspective of working with young people, and that exhibition was called Without a Place to Play, and it was commenting on the sort of loss of spaces, third spaces for young people to go to that isn't based around their academic education, isn't based around their role within their household or their family, but actually just their role in their community or with their sort of friendship groups. And so like my idea is sort of young people actually are having their places to play sort of taken away from them, and especially that alongside creative subjects and art subjects being defunded, a lot of our arts organisations closing down due to funding. So I think some of that starts with the young people, and the more you're given sort of room to play and experiment, whether that's with you and your identity as a person, or whether it's sort of your artistic practice or what you like doing in your spare time. Because I have a lot of conversations here with makers and members who they feel exactly that. They talk a lot about, as adults, we don't have this place to play and this place to experiment, especially if you are trying to have a career or like have your work pay your rent and for your food and everything else. There's not as much room to play because it needs to equate to some form of money so that you can continue to live and rent your studio. But speaking to them, realizing they actually they've lost their ability to play, which comes with the fact that they had some form of privilege in their childhood that meant they knew they were allowed to play at one point, and now they feel like they've lost that ability to play. And I think Blackhorse Workshop's like a wonderful place to come to sort of get your head into that and like be inspired by so many different people and see how they do all this different stuff. But I guess for me, my sort of reflection on that is, for a lot of the young people I work with, or even me myself, I don't think I was even given permission in childhood to play with the arts. It was either you need to go and make money when you're older, so this is pointless. We don't know why you're doing this. It's not going to equate to a career or to a stable house or anything like that. So I think there's two parts of it. I think there's people who had space to experiment and play within childhood and now either have built a career so that they can just continue to sort of play and experiment, or they are feeling that loss of experimentation and play within their work and creative practice. But then I think there's also a whole group of people who have never sort of been given that space, or even young people who are young now and teenagers now, they're not necessarily invited into spaces to play or to experiment and stuff.
Exhibition, for people who didn't see it, it was how many, 8 pieces? They were pairs of textile pieces that tufted rugs, and they're in pairs of youth centres around East London, one showing the place in its context and the other of the context with a hole where the youth centre is now closed. And they were very beautiful, and they were very, very well received. Today, what Ummi mentioned is in our cafe next door, we have a local artist leading a drawing club, and he's been running it. It's a lunchtime thing this since the beginning of the year for adults to come and do a bit of playful drawing. And that's been really sweet. But today he's running, because it's half term, one for kids. So the kids will, I think they're between sort of 5 and 6 mainly. And they're just going for it. And it's been full. And he only put tickets out a couple of days ago. And it just shows that, you know, there's a lot of parents locally who are like, well, of course my children need to come and sit in a cafe and draw a book full of pictures, but they don't think that they need to do it. And yeah, I mean, I've got kids at school, and I see how even in primary school, arts education is very different from what it used to be. And, you know, we have even small children who are going to grow up without that confidence to have that uninhibited drawing, which is what I was describing before we started recording. It's so lovely going on next door. There are these kids with these really uninhibited drawings, which I really, really enjoy. They're very sort of pure, aren't they? And grown-ups get very self-conscious. They start to apologise for their things before they've done it. And it's less interesting, isn't it, where something that someone has just drawn quickly can be really fascinating. And that's what I love about seeing kids draw. But, you know, plenty of kids are not getting that. Schools not necessarily going to be equipped to deal with that. teachers are coming through an education system that is not promoting that anymore. And if you don't have that at home, you know, where are you going to get that from? And if you never had that as a child, it's double hard to come back to that as an adult. And I think a lot of what, apart from the youth program that we do here, a lot of what places like Blackhorse Workshop do with our public programs for adults is helping adults rediscover, you know, sort of, in my last job, I used to describe it as rehabilitating office workers. You know, people are, I do this thing, but I don't really love it. And I want to develop some other stuff I do on the side. And if you had that playing as a young person, either with materials or just drawing, you can go back to that. If you never had it, it's very, very hard. And, you know, I've met people who had these dreams about learning a craft and they waited until they were retired. And it's not that you can't do it in later life, but it doesn't get easier, you know, and it's really, really sad that, because the capacity to learn new things diminishes as you get older. And it's really important to continue learning new things at all ages, to, you know, for your brain development. But the more you do when you're younger, the more you have to build on. And it, in a way, to me, it doesn't matter if it's your work or not, but you need it. And if you have, even if you're going to work in finance, if you've got creative skills, they will be relevant in your work. You know, it's about problem solving and looking at things from different points of view and being able to collaborate with other people that are really kind of fundamental, I think, to all workplaces. And I think we need creativity in everyone, because there's a lot of big problems in the world. They're not being fixed by the status quo. And if everyone is not feeling empowered to like talk about those problems, address those problems, think about different ways around those problems, you know, around the climate and social justice, then we're not going to get anywhere, you know. And we need to be encouraging everyone to consider themselves as artists and to apply that creative problem solving.
I think that swiftly actually moves on to the next section, which, Lucy, you raised a point about, I guess, the feeling of pressure to capitalize of everything you make. And I think, especially from coming from like post-graduating myself and Selina, I think our idea, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I feel like my idea of making has been so like brainwashed into an assignment, or it's being assessed, that I didn't actually know how to make stuff without that pressure of it's going to go somewhere, it's going to be exhibited, or it's going to be judged. And so it took like those 5 months at Blackhorse Workshop last year was so like crucial to like unlearn a lot of kind of behavior and habits of making that probably was quite negative to my idea of like creativity.
Yeah, so Blackhorse Workshop operates as like a social enterprise. And what does that model allow you to do differently?
Yeah, we're set up as a CIC, we're a social enterprise. So that means our like social charitable aims are as important as making money. We don't turn a profit, no one can extract any profit. Any surplus we made has to be reinvested in the business. So we're like a charity light without having all the hoops of being a charity. We have no core funding for Blackhorse Workshop. So we get the occasional bit of project funding, and Blackhorse Responders, the creative youth program, that is funded by the National Lottery. That project can never pay for itself. It has to be free to attend. So we'll always require funding. And it's very important to us, that project. But apart from that, everything we do has to cover the staff time, cover the costs. And it's a good position to be in at the moment as a business, because funding is really broken. And I think if we were, lots of arts organisations are much more funding dependent. Like we do have these income generating routes through the studio space, through the memberships, use of the workshop and our course programs. It's not easy. It's pretty tight to make it work. It doesn't always work every year. But if we were, a lot of funded organisations are in deficit, right? So in a way, I'm glad that we don't have core funding, because it is so hard at the moment. It's really, really broken. And I think that that change, especially post-COVID, of what funding at all scales looks like, is going to have a huge impact on the art sector and the community sector in general. Because when I was early career, if you could find time to write a funding application, you would get a lot of them. And it is really hard to get it now. And so people come with ideas where 10 years ago you could have said, yeah, you can write a little grant and you'll get a 1 or 2 year grant just to try it out. And that's just not available anymore. And it is right that funding is being diverted to the highest needs, but obviously highest needs are going up. And this is going to have a huge impact on the art sector. And I guess we can all guess what that will look like. But I suppose this comes back to the whole kind of creative thinking, like what we have to do in the creative sector is respond to the wider world however economic cycle that is changing. This is a tough one. It is easy to be very negative about it, but this is the current challenge that we have to help people respond to and help people exist within. There is no easy answers, but through that, some answers will, people will find a way through it that will be amazing. I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know how, I don't know how emerging artists are going to make it work with no funding, very good funding. I don't know how emerging arts organisations are going to manage. But those that do manage will be amazing.
And for Lucy, first of all, congratulations on your exhibition. What does a sustainable career in making realistically look like for you today?
For me, I believe the role of creative makers, artists, is always something alongside something. So for me, I think my facilitation and my education work is the core of my practice. I happen to make rugs and have this other creative output that I make with my hands, but actually my role in the community is an educator and facilitator and youth worker that sits within the creative and arts sort of world. From even that idea of a side hustle, so that when I used to tell people I worked in a pub, for example, their whole idea of me completely changed. They didn't know that I run art programs from the pub or that I did all these other things. They saw me as someone who worked in a pub. My individual frustration with that meant that I wanted people to be able to see me as all these other sort of things. But I was constantly thinking through, what do these other people think of me, rather than I turn up to work every day. I get to program my own art sessions in this pub. I've moved art into a pub where it doesn't usually exist. And actually, once I changed my mindset towards that, it made the idea of working this other job feel less like an other job, and made me bring all of the parts of sort of me and my job together. Yeah, the idea that, I don't know, someone could just make art for the rest of their lives and just be paid to do that, I actually think is how we end up with quite bad art and quite bad art institutions and quite boring art institutions and things that just don't really reflect what's going on in society. Whereas actually, if you have teachers, educators, youth workers, people who run pubs, people who run their community centres, nurses, midwives, whoever you are in society, if you're then bringing that into sort of the context of art and creativity, I think that's a strength, rather than seeing it as oh, I haven't made it as this or this or this. It's that two roles in society can run alongside each other and are as integral as each other. And I think especially even what Joe was just saying about the economics of our country right now, and sort of the need for people to be employed in certain sectors, especially in nursing and teaching. I think as artists and creatives, we care about society, we care about things getting better. Usually we see art and creativity as a tool for change, and actually starting to rethink what that role looks like in society, rather than trying to produce more capitalist industries around the production of art or community work or all of these other things. I think for me, the biggest where I felt I have a sustainable creative career is by seeing, for example, my exhibition as completely equal, if not like a little bit like, oh, that was really fun and really great to do, but really me turning up to Blackhorse Workshop and working with responders and our SEN schools and sort of our Make Stuff Club is, I'm like, mad, that's a sustainable creative career that I've actually managed to sort of get myself into. So I think, yeah, seeing yourself as like a dual role and sort of pairing up where it is that you fit and like where you're best sitting within your community to help or make change or support or be really important and integral to like a healthy community, and then bringing sort of like your arts and creativity into that, I think for me is a sort of a way to see yourself rather than constantly seeing as like you're failing or you're not quite where you want it to be. I think, yeah, rather than seeing those things as like, I have this job, but I do this, it's I am this person and I have this role in society, this role in my community, this role, but my practice is based in art, creativity, and making change through that. Whether you're working with tiny little children in a nursery or you're working in a residential home with older people, you can bring all of those things in and they're just as important as if it's an exhibition in V&A East Storehouse, if you know what I mean.
And that's why you're good at what you do, because for you it's a cohesive whole. And you are a socially engaged, you've got a socially engaged practice, which I think in some ways the sector has moved, I feel like the sector has moved on, and that having a socially engaged practice is a recognised thing. Institutions understand what it is, they want to engage artists on that. Not everyone has that, not everyone's art is about that, and that is fine. But if your art isn't about that, you probably shouldn't be doing that on the side, because it will not come together. And just like we have lots of tutors here teaching woodwork and metalwork, if that doesn't feed them in some way, it's not going to last long. These things have to tie in. Otherwise, you're probably just not going to be great at that public-facing element of it. If you just want to paint or make whatever it is you're making without having a socially engaged practice, like, you probably need a different side hustle. And I don't know what those are, but they're out there, aren't they? And I mean, just like artists have always had the stuff they do to sell and the stuff they do for themselves, and it's just what your practice is as a cohesive whole, I think. But I think the last few years, there's a much greater understanding about creative health and about socially engaged practice and about taking art and culture out of London and the big institutions, and even Arts Council England is kind of getting on board with the need for that, to bring art to people, to take it to community centres, to libraries, and it doesn't have to be sitting in a museum to be art. And that understanding is, I think, much more pervasive in the cultural sector, and that's quite important. That's going to have, that will hopefully be the thing we remember from these times, I guess, is that movement out of museums, because lots of people are never going to go to museums, or if they go, they'll be excited by what they see there. But if they see it in a different space, or the work represents them in a different way, then they might be.
It's kind of an echo of what you both have said about the balance of being a maker and facilitating. And I think because we're both currently me and Selina are in boats of being sometimes I feel really weird calling myself a maker, because I'm like, what do I even make? And it's just a battle that I think is a back and forth with, I think it's a shared experience for a lot of creatives. It's like, how do I even call myself creative? And it's taken me, even after doing 4 years of a degree, and I'm still like, am I even a creative? But that's a different tangent. But I was wondering whether your relationship to making changed when moving to facilitation. Although I know, Lucy, you started off doing after school clubs from from the start of your career, so maybe it doesn't necessarily apply, but really interested to hear about protecting your creativity. Did that relation change to making into facilitation, and how do you protect your creativity while still creating opportunity for others? Especially being quite early on in my career, it's like I love the social impact, and it's what I found that I'm really interested in now, but then I still want to have the room to play for myself and make. So yeah, any advice or insight into that?
It's the play thing, isn't it? So if you're waiting for a brilliant idea so you can produce a whole series of photographs, or, you know, one big artwork to happen and make time for this big piece, is never going to happen, is it? But it's just like having a regular, ongoing practice of any description, right? Because just like anything, it is practice, isn't it? It's literally practice. And if you build that into your day or week, your mind, your body comes to expect it, you make it happen. If you're always waiting for the day when you're going to suddenly have loads of time or a brilliant idea, then that practice will leave you. So it's really important to protect in any way, shape or form. And if you protect it, it will grow.
What you just said about building in, like the fact use of the word practice is like, you've got to practice it. And that can literally be like the first half an hour of your lunch break. That is every day. Do you know what I mean? You put your headphones on and that's your sort of half an hour to get stuff out. But I guess in terms of relationship, like changing to making, I think for me, made me way more confident. Like my sort of like move, I definitely did not see myself as like an artist or maker as such, because I hadn't had an exhibition with my name on it, or I hadn't, like, no one had told me, oh, you're an artist. And so like fearful of calling myself that. But I think as soon as I was in a position where I was seeing young people produce stuff, and I absolutely to my core saw them as an artist, as a maker, as all of these things, it sort of reaffirmed back to me that's like, well, if I see that person as an artist because they've just sat in a room and made art, then surely that applies to me in every room that I'm in, that I'm making art. So I think that sort of helped break down my own, like, and whether you want to call it like imposter syndrome or whatever you want to sort of like label it as, but those things we've been taught that aren't for us until we get there, and then we have to sort of unpick and unlearn those ideas. I think for me, facilitation really, really helped with that, and put a greater focus into like what my practice was. For a long time, I wouldn't call myself an artist because people would say, what do I make? Like you just said, Ummi, like, what do I make? And I did so like anything. My house is full of every material you could possibly think of. So because I wasn't, in my mind, a textile artist or a metal artist or a woodwork artist, I couldn't see it like that. Whereas I think that just sort of, open my mind to like, if you're doing it, you are, like, that's enough. You don't have to have it live anywhere else or even seen by anyone else. And then in terms of like protection, I think protecting your time, but I think for me, that question, and maybe I understood it slightly differently, but for me in those spaces, I have worked with other artists and facilitators who they very much go in with the idea that they are protecting their ideas, their artist practice. Whereas for me, in a room, in my head, I'm trying to protect young people's sort of ideas and work, in the idea of like intellectual property, and sort of those ideas live with those young people. Just because I then have access to maybe go and pitch that idea to a gallery and I might get a yes in a way that that young person wouldn't. I think my idea of like protecting creativity more sits within that. And it's a little bit different now in the context of Blackhorse Workshop, but the work I used to do with like journalism and sort of young people producing journalism, especially around issues that affected their lives, there was lots of stories that, because we were taking them to different journalists and different journalists were hearing about these stories, there was lots of people who were almost like, brilliant, I've never heard that story. I'm going to take that and I'm going to go get paid £800 to write a 1,000-word article, and their name goes on it. But actually that was that young person's story. And it might take another 10 years for that story to be told by that young person, but let's work to do that. So I think in my head, the protection part of it, when you're an artist and a facilitator, especially when you're welcoming people to share ideas and their own practice, my idea of protection sort of goes back onto them, of how do we protect their work, their ideas before they're into full fruition, so that they're not sort of like taken by other people who already are at a point where they can just email a gallery or someone who will commission them for something with those ideas, if that makes sense.
I think when I said protect creativity, in my head, I was just thinking giving space and time for yourself and other people and like balancing that. But I think that raises a whole different and very important conversation regarding which the Youth Collective have had several times about exploitation of young people's ideas. And often, I mean, we're given so much agency in the Youth Collective to really direct and have direct impact in the young community, but there are definitely places and situations I've been in where you're very extracted of your ideas, you're not even like compensated for it, and then it's like they run with it. But I think there's definitely been a shift, like experiences local community where you really are like given the space and platform to like make an impact. So yeah, that's also just as important.
I actually wanted to ask both of you, like, what is something like a change that you want to see within the arts, or maybe like on a personal journey of yourselves, what is something that you would like to like challenge within like making or your practice?
I think the context of Blackhorse Workshop and what I'm doing in my role here, I think attitude change towards young people with neurodivergence is like the biggest thing for me. Always worked in SEN education. I also think the creative industries is some of the perfect places for young people with SEN needs or additional needs to look to go into, with the flexibility of your timings, like the sort of autonomy you can have over your work life, I think is really important. So I think the creative industries is great at talking about how the people who are already in the industry are neurodivergent. They're not so great at getting new young people with neurodivergence into the industry. So I think that's what I'd like the specific change to be in the context of Blackhorse Workshop. I guess for me personally, it'd be more sort of classism. All industries, but especially creative industries, there's this weird sort of middle ground where people say things and they don't know what that sounds like. And sometimes other parts of discrimination can be easier to label and sort of like call out in very specific ways. And I feel like classism personally is like one of the ones that it's harder to put your sort of finger on exactly what it is, and it's not a protected characteristic currently, so you can legally just discriminate against people class wise. So I think that's personally that's what it would be.
I think that's really I think also for me when I went to uni as well, I did have a bit of a culture shock. But yeah, there was a lot of I guess people like who did art who did come from like a very privileged background, and when you kind of speak to them, it's like, oh, we can't really relate.
The shift I would like to see is a kind of movement beyond the creative sector of just an understanding that we need everyone to have creative skills, whether they're going to be in the creative sector or not. And to be, especially within education, but you know, actually just within employment, like whatever job you're in, encouraging people to be collaborative and cooperative and have a creative approach. So yeah, a spreading of those things that are really important in creativity beyond.
So to wrap it up, it is the big question. So it's about creativity, necessity, and responsibility. So for both of you, what is one thing that you'd wish you'd known at the start of your creative career? Any little advice that maybe you can give us, gifts to our young people watching? Maybe, yeah, something inspirational, or it doesn't have to be.
I think for me, the thing that I ended up coming down to that is, I think, the most important piece I wish I'd been told specifically is all of the things that made me feel out of place in big art institutions, at University of the Arts London, at these big sort of institutions, and especially being young, turning up like 19, 20, 21. Sort of all of the things that throughout that process, I left with a sense of like, oh, too northern, too like all of these things that stories I told myself in my head as to why I didn't fit in there have come full circle and now are absolutely every single one of my strengths in my job. And actually there was a reason I didn't fit into those institutions at the time, and that's because those institutions weren't made for working class young people that weren't from like, do you know what I mean, middle class London families. And so Now I feel better that I didn't fit in at that time, because all of those things are going to help me hopefully change those institutions so that in 10 years' time, another one can walk in and not feel all of those things and not have to pretend that they know what language they're using, they know what words they're talking about. And I'm far more confident now to be like, I actually don't know what that means. Can you explain that like normally? And sort of putting it back on them. So I think just having confidence in, if there's a big institution that you know historically has not been the most inclusive and you don't feel included, it's not you. Do you know what I mean? It's the institution, and actually they will be all of your strengths when you're going into the community and you're actually making connections with the people who mean something in your community. That's always going to be your strength.
Thing I would do differently is just like try everything, because that is sort of the only way you get more confident. And there, you know, it doesn't get easier to try lots of different things and actually not worry about things not working out and failing. You know, there's a lot to be learned in things going wrong and why you don't want to do something, or don't want to work somewhere, or don't want to be around certain people, and just be brave and get through as many different skills and experiences as you can.
Even when you're in that transition period of not quite knowing how certain skills you're learning or things that you're doing are going to translate, that even the more sort of the things you don't even know you're picking up are actually sort of useful. So I was saying, like, for example, the pub I used to work in used to have a lot of rugby teams who used to come down. We used to have a lot of pub fights. I never knew that skill was going to be useful. However, it meant in a lot of schools and groups of young people who other people would step away from conflict and sort of resolving that, I had this absolute confidence in like stepping forward towards that. At the time, I never knew that ability to stop a fight would actually end up meaning I get put forward for jobs that a lot of other people who might have a degree, might have worked in the arts longer, might have way more connections in the industry, aren't being put forward for, because again, it's those connections with people and the skills that you have with people that people want to invest in. So yeah, I think just like holding on to, you might not know what it is in this job right now that you're going to take on, but there will always be something that you're sort of taking that'll apply to another job or another community space that you're going into.
I think that's super important, especially I feel like with young people, we get quite in our heads about if we're doing like a certain job that's not exactly what we want to do. We often forget that there's actually certain skills that you're building or certain things that you can bring to the table.
It's been like such insightful conversations, and I think even watching this back and like pausing and slowing and taking bits of like nuggets of wisdom will be like so useful for the young community and like the youth collective. We can also just have like any closing reflections if you want to shout out anything about Blackhorse Workshop with what's going on, because I love to shout out about Blackhorse Workshop to everyone I know. And yeah, the different kind of things you offer. If there's any like personal projects you're doing, it's like a space where it will reach a lot of the young community.
Well, Responded 2026 is going to be recruiting starting nowish, and it's beginning after Easter holidays. That will be running every week for 4 months. For anyone who is 16 to 25 who either live, works or studies in the borough of Waltham Forest, you come to us every week, learn loads of wood and metal work, and then we sort of build across those 4 months to produce a community intervention, which can literally be anything that the young people want to produce. And we take that out into our community and start engaging people with the issues that are sort of affecting young people in the context of creative activism. So that will be coming up. So I'll share that as well, the application form coming up.
Things that are not, people who wouldn't be interested or able to apply for responders. We've got our course program running evenings and weekends, so lots of different wood and metalwork courses to help people experiment and engage with those. And then the key for Blackhorse Workshop, that makes us different from a lot of other workshop spaces is we've got our studio members. We've got space for studio members for emerging artists to be based on site and use the workshops here. But we also have open access membership. So anyone who's over 18 and has done our health and safety inductions can book a bench for £35 a day, or 20% of that if you are in receipt of best benefits. So really affordable access to fully equipped wood and metal workshops to experiment and be in a community of other people who can share experiences and help you experiment as well.
In terms of, like, we were talking earlier about sort of the culture of a space, and like I came to Blackhorse Workshop as a customer. I'd never been here before and came for a wood turning course, and I was already slightly confident using like a chop saw and some like woodwork bits from my own studio, but definitely still had apprehension sort of walking into this big shared workspace. But it was literally from one course here that I was like, I've never been somewhere with so many machines, but also there'd be so many just like normal people like chatting and getting on with each other, rather than this idea that you're walking in and people are looking at you like you don't know, or there's already assumption that you don't know what you're doing, and then work my hardest to get a job here.
I wanted to signpost people because I'm looking at the website, which is 10 out of 10 website, by the way. Accessibility, I've never seen anything quite like it. There's like an open map space where, so if you're not sort of Northeast London based and you really like, I love the sound of this, but I don't have it near me, there's a map which was so useful that maps out all the kind of other workspaces and woodwork like workshops around the UK, that you can maybe find something similar in your local area. And I think I would just encourage everyone to see what's on their doorstep.
We have regular tours once a month, but we're pretty much open to ad hoc tours for anyone who's interested in the space. Most of the time people can show up, there'll be someone able to show you around, not every hour of every day, but we try to. We also have the cafe next door, and that's an exhibition space. And we're always up for hearing from local creatives who want to exhibit there, or develop new projects with us, like courses and events.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me and Ummi.
I just think there's been such important points raised, and the one that I'm really leaving with is that we should learn from young people and just little ones that are experimenting with play, and adults can learn a lot from kids and not the other way around sometimes. And just like the wrap-up thought of, I guess this episode was about, who gets to make, but I'm wondering if it's actually more about the systems, it's about the wider structures, and that's maybe something we should be targeting. But yeah, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
And this will be uploaded for anyone that missed it, by the way, so it'll be on platforms.
Lovely to meet you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.